Hello, welcome LinkedIn and social media friends on all platforms. We are here today to talk about creating inclusive communication environments at work. Gina and I are so happy to be here with you. And we thought we would work together because we come from complementary points of view. Gina's book is Leading with Inclusion and talks about what organizations can do and what we can do from a systemic level of creating inclusion or leading with inclusion. And I'm focusing on how people who are not in the leadership role yet, who often don't look or have characteristics of leaders, can share their voice, particularly at work. So the way this will work is that we will introduce ourselves and then just share a couple tips. So Gina will share a tip from the organizational side, what leaders can do. I'll talk about what individuals can do, have some discussion, and see if we can get 2 or 3 tips from each perspective in. We'll be with you for 15, 20-ish, maybe even 30 minutes. We'll see how this goes, but we're happy to be here. So Gina, will you tell us a little bit about who you are, your book, and where you're located?
Oh, absolutely. And Hope, it's really great to be with you. And to everyone who is watching this, wherever you are, welcome. I'm glad that you're here. I'm Gena Cox. I'm an organizational psychologist, an executive coach, and a new author. You'll hear more about that in a second. And, I say that, the thing that I know the most about in the whole wide world is about how humans behave in organizations. And so that's what I've studied. That's what I've consulted about. And that's what I use as a foundation to help other people figure out how they can be more effective leaders, because I'm also an executive coach where I work directly one-on-one with individual leaders and with leadership teams to help them figure out what are the things that they can do or should do in order to satisfy the expectations of their employees when it comes to leadership effectiveness. And as Hope mentioned a couple of months ago, actually October 11th, so just about 2 months ago, my new book, Leading Inclusion, came out. And Leading Inclusion is a book written for leaders to really help them understand how to think about inclusion from a leadership perspective, and to think about the actions that they can take to actually drive inclusion that employees can see and feel. And my book, Leading Inclusion, is available wherever books are sold.
Hey, that's great. We met through a networking group for women authors. My book came out 1 year before Gina's, October 5th of 2021, and we work well together. I do a lot of workshops and a lot of speaking, mostly for groups of often women, people of color, anyone who feels disenfranchised or just not in a leadership role, really. So trying to get more people to speak up at work. And I love Gina's work because it really, as we all know, there's so much of this that relies on the leaders. And so I love that she's doing the coaching and that she wrote this book. All right, Gina, so talking about leaders, what can leaders do? Like if we want to talk about it from a communication standpoint, that's the bend that I've come from is as a communications coach for about 15 years. I'm focused on the communication aspect of it. So Gina, what can leaders do to create an inclusive environment so that people of all levels of the organization feel comfortable sharing their voice?
Yeah, the funny thing about communication specifically is that it is the currency of leadership, right? You cannot be a leader unless you communicate, and yet we don't necessarily focus on it as much as we should. And I think the key to effective communication from an inclusion perspective is what I call respect, the word that I think most people know and recognize. And I like to talk about respect because respect is the foundation for inclusion. If you can't look another person in the eye, if you don't feel some sense of curiosity about that person sufficient that you would then ask them questions and get to know what's on their minds, it's very, very difficult to be an inclusive leader. So for me, the number one thing for leaders to think about when they think about inclusion and communication is to think about respect first, that then can lead them to curiosity, to asking questions and learning, because every single individual that you lead is unique.
I love that. It's so important. And it could be one of those things that we're like, oh, yeah, sure, we know about respect, but actually really internalizing that. How can I get curious? How can I respect it? I'm sure you've seen this, Gina. There's this bias towards leaders want to. They lead the way they want to be led, or they wind up identifying with relating to people who are more like them. We know about these biases. And so when you really tap into that respect and that curiosity, that's powerful. I love that tip. On the individual front, I think there's something similar there is around, because I consider the respect and the curiosity to be somewhat of a mindset to get into that position of let me think about, really think about others and be curious about them. And I would say from the individual perspective, it's around that mindset of I have an important perspective to share. And I'll say that again. I think that people need to know at all levels of the organization that they have an important perspective to share, especially when they are not in a position of power in the organization. And really waking up in the morning, showing up to meetings, recognizing that it doesn't matter if you've been in this role for 2 weeks or 20 years, or whether you look like everyone or think like everyone or not at all, especially not at all. When you think I have a unique perspective to share, you really then feel empowered to say, maybe I don't know this topic that well, but this organization, this group of people should hear it because my perspective matters.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And in fact, one of the things that I like to encourage leaders to think about when they're thinking about inclusion and actually about anything that they do is leaders need to not worry that they have to have all the answers. In
Yeah.
fact, it's probably the opposite of that in a disrupted work world, like an overall world that we're living in. It seems to be advantageous for leaders to just be more willing to ask employees what they think, get their opinions, get their ideas. The solutions that they're likely to generate will probably surprise them and maybe better solutions than they would have derived on their own. So I actually think it's just really a good idea for managers to get comfortable with the idea of including other people's points of view. Um, the other tip that I would offer for leaders is somewhat related to this because I wanted to talk about making space. And this is the whole notion that, you've got to. Often people say to me, well, I have this particular problem, and no matter what I do, the employees don't seem to be on board with what I'm doing. And
Mm.
I always say, aha, this is really not an issue about the thing that you're trying to do today. This is a trust issue. This is an issue of something that has been done in the past,
Mhm.
something that unfortunately has caused employees not to believe or trust. And
Mm.
so, one aspect I think that leaders from an organizational perspective should think about when they think about communication is to be really clear about what is the state of affairs in the moment before they say what they have to say. Because your point of view about how employees feel about what you are saying might be very different than what they're actually thinking. And it's very difficult to get your point across, very difficult to get employees to support initiatives and activities and ideas if they don't trust you. So I really encourage leaders to, my second tip, to focus as much on building trust as they think about focusing
Mhm.
on effective communications. And how do you build trust? You build trust by saying what you're going to do,
Mhm.
doing what you say you're going to do, finding out how you might need to tweak what you have done to satisfy employees' needs. Because I'm really thinking about employees as the judges of your of trust and communication, and then making it sort of a cyclical thing, where a cycle where you do something, you get input before you do the something, you do the something, you keep iterating and making it better. Employees feel like they're a part of it, and then that makes it much easier then for all of your other communications to actually be seen, to actually be heard and believed.
I love that. And it's interesting, I'm in the Bay Area. I believe, are you in Florida? Yes, right. And I know that we do, as we all know, all of you watching are in millions of different locations, and we work from everywhere. Before the pandemic, I was pretty much exclusively in tech. And what we would see is that leaders would get so busy. They'd be so focused
Mhm.
on creating their minimum viable product and getting funding and getting customers and doing these things. And leaders weren't taking that time to build that trust. I'm painting a broad stroke, but like you said, it's so interesting how we can think, oh, the product's most important, the business is most important. But when you're not building the trust, the whole company can fall apart, and you're not going to be able to be successful or fulfilled, and certainly not retain your employees. So that's such an important one. I want to follow up or ask you a question on that, Gina. How you said iterating, doing it again and again. Is there one, if we think about building trust in a meeting setting, what would that look like? What would a leader do? How could she or he create trust in a meeting with their team?
Yeah, that's one that is obviously an ongoing process because if you're working with an intact team, it's what you do over time that will matter. But
Mm,
as a starting point, I think you probably want to have some rules of engagement that you have in your head. You don't have to articulate them, but I think you ought to have some rules of engagement that sort of define the norms for how
mm,
you want people to communicate with one another. So, for example, and then of course you have to model that, right? So, for example, let's say that one of the values that you wish to see other people exhibit was that they would be collaborative and sharing, and they wouldn't hog the space, and they wouldn't think only their ideas matter. Well, that would be just one communication value that you can define. You can articulate it, directly if you want, but the better way might be to just model that. So when you put your idea on the table and the other people start to talk about things, and you notice that Gina doesn't seem to be able to get space because you know somebody over here is preventing her, or they're taking up all the space or whatever, you would say, oh, it looks like if Gina had something to say, you would make space for Gina so she could get some space. And then on the other hand, if you think that as Gina is speaking, she's only focused on her own point of view, but you can see that there's something that Gina is saying that really relates to something that Hope is working on, then you might say, Gina, have you talked to Hope about that? I really
mm.
think the two of you should get together and then come back and tell us what you think. My point with that example is that for all of these dynamics, the leader has a really good opportunity to define what will happen. But you have to think about this in advance, and then you have to watch, right? Your role, the leader's role in a meeting, should be to be observing the dynamics, not just saying, I want to get to an outcome, and then contributing to help that team work together and communicate together more effectively.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. There's a great example, and from the other side, I think I have a very similar tip, and that's so we want our leaders to do that, to take that time to create that rules of engagement, whether it's explicit or they're modeling it, and to pull out when they see it looks like Gina has something to say or Hope has something to say, and really pull it out. On the other side of it, we don't have to wait for the leaders to do that, so we can create partnership, allyship. And that idea of like, okay, we have a weekly team meeting or we work together on a team. Why don't those of us, it's not a mutiny, but why don't we get together and say, what are our rules of engagement? How should we respond? How can we support one another? So when we see that over and over, one person is not contributing, we can pull them into the conversation. Or when we see that someone's interrupting, we can pull them out of the conversation and call them out in a way that's respectful but effective. So
Mhm.
having, I think too often leaders and independent contributors or those not in leadership feel like they have it all on their own shoulders, that they're doing this alone. And really that partnership of being able to say, hey, I've got someone who's got my back and we know that we'll stick up for each other. Or maybe you're going into the team meeting, you're like, I'm just not feeling great today. And hey, could you carry my load today? And next week, I'm sure I'll be back to normal and I'll contribute the way that I'd like to contribute. But relying on that support system is so much more powerful than feeling like we have to go it alone.
Mhm. Yeah, that is absolutely a great idea, and it gets to the essence of what we're really talking about. Whether we use words like diversity, equity, and inclusion, or we put those three words together, or whatever, these kinds of issues when they come up, people tend to make them seem more complicated than they really are. The truth is, and here's a little secret, it's not just a tip; it's a secret.
Mhm.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion are just some labels.
Mhm.
All there are labels for how we interact with one another on a daily basis in our workplace. And what we want is that those interactions should be pretty consistent, regardless of who we're interacting with. That's
Mhm.
really what we're trying to get at here. And so I love your tip because I think that human interaction is
Mhm.
really the only thing that matters. It's really what we ought to emphasize when we try to identify the good leaders from those who are not as effective, instead of worrying as much about making complicated trainings about things that are more abstract. I think if we always stick to the fundamentals of what does
Mhm.
it feel like to work with you and what can we do to make it feel good as much as possible, what do we start doing, what do we stop, I think we will really we tend to have quickly identify behaviors that we can change.
Yeah, I love that. Have you spent time working in organizations? Beyond, I know you're the executive coach, but actually in the consulting role in terms of like impacting the culture or looking at it beyond the leader itself and the whole dynamics within the team.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. In fact, I spent a big chunk of my career measuring employee opinions and then using employee opinion data to guide leaders to building more healthier, psychologically healthier organizational cultures and so
Mhm.
on. So it is always part of that, and so one of the other things that I have learned that I will offer as my third tip, I suppose, is that what I often find is that the thing that it is that we don't do very well in organizations is we're very poor at what we call difficult conversations. And when we say difficult conversations, all we really mean is that there's something we want to communicate, and we're so worried about how the other person is going to receive it that we either choose not to communicate it or we water down and don't tell them the whole story. And so you got two people walking around in the wilderness, one having something on their mind, not being able to articulate it, and the other one having no idea that this person is stewing because they have this thing on their mind. And I see that so much, regardless of the work that I'm doing, either as you say, at the leader level or at the organizational level, that I almost feel like that is the most important thing, is that we can help people create a culture that says
Mhm.
it is okay to express what you believe, and then for somebody else to have to listen to you and know how to receive that, and then know
Mhm.
what to do with that. And the two of you at the end of the day can then still come back together and get this job done, because that's really the only reason you're here. And so my third tip has to do with this whole notion that we should all get prepared for difficult conversations. It really supports inclusion, because when you put a group of people together who vary, they're going to probably have different points of view and say and do things that you misinterpret, and that goes for every direction. And so having a little idea, a little sort of a script about how you would think uh, about this whole notion of difficult conversations is really, really helpful. Anyone who wants to know more about this can just send me a note. They can put it in the chat. They can send me a note on LinkedIn, or they can email me, Gena@genacox.com, and I'll give you the link so that you can go get this little handout that I have about difficult conversations, a script. But basically, the essence of that is to sort of know it, plan for it. Always do these kinds of conversations one on one, never with other people around. Say what you have to say, and then give the other person some time to process what you have said. They don't even need to process it that day, because you may say something they've never heard before, and you've had all this time to process it. And now they're like, "Oh." So difficult conversations do not require people to give you an answer or response in the moment. Give them some time to process it, and then say, how about we get together next week, Thursday at 10 o'clock, and talk about it, set a time, and then come back. And in that interim, both of you have had a chance to kind of think about it. That person has had a chance to process and maybe deal with their emotions, and they're much better prepared to come back and follow up on that conversation with you.
I That is so critical. I think that I mean, I think all of your tips are fantastic, but that idea of preparing, having that script, having those best practices around the difficult conversations. Um, One of the things I want to emphasize too is the idea that it's so hard to do to actually do it well, and or to even just have the conversations. But what you said that I think is super important too is creating that space for the reaction, because we as people, even if it's not a total surprise, in my experience in coaching and working with individuals in my personal life, but certainly my professional life, watching people receive feedback, especially unwanted feedback or possibly difficult feedback, it's hard. There's some version of either defensiveness or shame or embarrassment or questions, or there might even be that tunnel vision of like, I can't even listen anymore because I'm overwhelmed. And so creating that respect, that clarity of the message, and some space, and then the follow up, so that then we can go back and understand like what it is that was happening, reconfirm what that message is, and figure out best steps for moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely, Hope. And that's where I say this belongs solidly at the organizational level, at the culture
Mhm.
level, because if the culture
Mhm.
of the organization does not support this, it is very hard for individuals to behave this way, and they're not likely to behave this way. So the culture has to be one that supports the idea that, we'll have difficult conversations. It will be okay. And at the end of it, we will still be able to go have lunch together or drink
Yes.
after work or whatever it is that we do. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so on the individual perspective, I receive so many questions about how do I set boundaries. My manager is reaching out to me on the weekend, slacking me at 8 p.m. I've got kids. I've got to go pick them up from daycare, all these things. And how do I set boundaries? And one of the things I love that we're aligned in this idea of like the fundamentals are what matter. And what I talk to people about is a fundamental truth that I've found in leaders and communicators, that we want to find a balance of strength and warmth.
Mm-hmm.
And for everyone that we are attracted to, interested in, respect, there is that balance. And when we look at it, we can define it in a lot of ways. But as it relates to setting boundaries, you can say clearly, as you know, my children need to be picked up at 5:30 every day. I will need to leave by 5 p.m. And I can log in again for 30 minutes after they're in bed. You can do it with clarity, which is strong, but you can do it also with eye contact, with giving the concession that I'll log in later, some version of the mannerisms that are warm. The other thing that happens, I find, is that people feel like they're needing to be incredibly clear, and it's hard to be direct. So I encourage individuals who are not in power, who feel intimidated or overwhelmed by setting boundaries or by bringing up difficult things to their managers, is to use questions, is to get genuinely curious, back to your initial tip, and to use some questions and say, so Gena, who is a lovely manager, I'm sure, but Gena, I know that you want me to work on this project until 8 p.m. Can you set some context about why it needs to be done tonight? I want to understand what's happening. What are some other options? Are there other people who could be pulled in? Are there other time? Is there another time that we could work on this? Are there other ways in which we could meet the client's needs rather than work on this piece? So asking some questions, not in a passive aggressive way, but in a genuinely curious way, to both invite some awareness on the other person's part, but also so you too can learn, okay, what is going on? Why am I getting these things? Why am I the recipient of a demand that I feel like is pushing me out of my comfort zone?
Yeah, I love that. I love those tips. The other thing that came to mind as you were saying that I practice quite a bit is I have a thing that's a rule that says clients always ask me to do things, so they want my time, right? And I cannot satisfy every client's demands, especially not when it comes to doing it when they want it done.
Right.
So I have to find a way. And so what I have practiced to do is I tell my clients what I can do. I don't focus on what I cannot do. And so same thing with managers, right? So the client wants this. So my goal is to try to figure out what is it that they really want. They don't necessarily have to have it on Tuesday at 10 o'clock. What is it that they want? I focus on what do they want. And once I'm really clear about what is it exactly that you want, and you can do this with the manager, so the questions could be about that, then I like, aha, so they want this thing done by Wednesday morning, or they want this thing in a square, not in a circle. And now for me to do a square, I know that I need two more. Like, it gives me the information I need. So I love your idea of asking questions. And then I say to my client, I'm not able to get this done on Tuesday at 10 o'clock, but here's what I can do. I can do Monday, Wednesday, whatever. And I present the options that I can do that will work with my needs. In this case, because I'm a divorced single parent, although right now my daughter is an adult, but I had to live this for many years.
Yeah.
I had to really learn how to say that, because I could never stay after work and go to happy hour. I could never just hang out and not look at the clock. I had to get my daughter back from childcare. So just getting accustomed and empowering yourself to do this.
Yes, I love that focus on what I can do, because you're exactly right, Gena. I think all of us, when we're in that place of being pushed beyond our comfort zone, then we do get down on ourselves. Like, I'm not good enough at home. I'm not good enough at work. I'm not, all those things. So really that idea of setting the boundary in a positive way and feeling empowered yourself.
That's right.
Oh my gosh, this is fantastic. Okay, well, Gena, we need to do a part 2 at some point. But for now, how can those people watching, find you? You mentioned your email. Will you share all the different ways in which they can find you?
Yeah, they can find me everywhere. Isn't that amazing?
It is
So
amazing.
probably the easiest, LinkedIn. My name is Gena, not Gina, and don't ask me why, but it's Gena Cox. So you can find me on LinkedIn, and on social media. You can find me on Instagram, and sometimes on Twitter. But you can also email me, and my email address is just my first name and then at my full name, Gena@genacox.com. You can find Leading Inclusion wherever books are sold, including on Amazon.com. And if you want to talk to me about any of the things we've been talking about, or about speaking opportunities or whatever, just send me a note. People say that I'm really good at being responsive, because I think if you take the time to reach out, I'll always honor that.
Love that. Excellent. And like Gena, I'm Hope at hopetimberlake.com and happy to answer questions. I play almost exclusively in LinkedIn, though I do have a smaller presence on Instagram and Twitter. But you will see more of us. We've got lots of things to share. So we'll bring something more to you before too long. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sharing. And Gena, thank you for your time and all your fantastic strategies and tips for all of our viewers.
Oh, it's been great to be with you today, Hope. Looking forward to doing this again.
Excellent. All right. Bye.